Why is it that the smarter someone becomes, the more they seem to drift away from everyone else? Why do the sharpest minds prefer empty rooms over crowded gatherings? And here's a bolder question. What if what we call social life isn't connection at all, but distraction concealed as connection? Could solitude be not a sign of loneliness, but a form of liberation? In this video, we're stepping into one of the most unsettling truths ever expressed about human nature, a truth voiced by Arthur Schopenhauer, a philosopher famous not for comforting illusions, but for cutting reality open with almost surgical bluntness. This message isn't aimed at everyone. It's for those who feel strangely uneasy in social settings, who often sense they're observing rather than participating, who find deeper meaning in the quiet of their own minds than in the noise of parties or group chatter. Today, we're uncovering why genuinely intelligent people often retreat from social life, not because they dislike others, but because they perceive social interaction for what it really is. And stay with me until the end, because the final insight might completely reshape how you view your own solitude. It's the most crucial revelation of all, but before we start, support the channel if you're someone who chooses depth over superficial entertainment, truth over comfort, and inner growth over social validation. Hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments, have you ever felt more yourself when you're alone? Your story might resonate with someone who desperately needs to hear it. Now, let's step into Schopenhauer's first brutal observation. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that most of what we call social interaction is not nourishment for the mind, but noise. Not just literal noise, but mental clutter, gossip, comparison, trivial talk, and the constant pressure to participate in things that drain rather than enrich us. According to him, the average person lives surrounded by this endless buzzing. But the thinker, the one who pauses, observes, and sees beneath the surface, quickly realizes that this noise doesn't expand the self. It diminishes it. Imagine you're an artist trying to paint a masterpiece, yet every few minutes someone barges into your studio demanding attention. Come to this event. Respond to that message. Did you hear what happened with so-and-so? How much of your vision would survive repeated interruptions? How long before your creativity dissolves? Schopenhauer wasn't theorizing, he was noticing a pattern throughout history. The greatest minds have repeatedly stepped away from society, not because they despised people, but because they needed space to protect their inner world. Think of Newton's secluded brilliance, Kafka's quiet melancholy, Nietzsche's mountain solitude, Emily Dickinson's silent refuge. Time and time again, solitude becomes the soil where introspection, insight, and genius take root. Why? Because being alone removes the obligation to wear masks. In social life, we constantly shift our tone, speech, and behavior to match those around us. The intelligent individual senses this shape-shifting more intensely, and the constant adjustment becomes exhausting. In solitude, there is no role to perform, no facade to maintain. You simply are. Schopenhauer famously said, "The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him." For the shallow mind, life is obvious, simple, and entertainment is enough. But for the deep mind, existence is layered with contradiction, beauty, suffering, meaning, and absurdity, topics rarely welcomed in casual conversation. So why force yourself into exchanges that starve you? So when was the last time a conversation left you feeling more whole instead of more fragmented? And if you cannot remember, what does that tell you about the spaces you're trying to fit into? You might wonder, if social connection is so essential to human happiness, why do the deepest thinkers consistently pull away from it? Schopenhauer's answer was simple but brutal, because most social interaction isn't rooted in truth or meaning, but in distraction, validation, and ego. According to him, people rarely come together to grow. They come together to escape themselves. For the philosopher, this kind of interaction was hollow. He compared the intelligent person to an eagle, one who soars alone, not out of arrogance, but because the higher you rise, the fewer companions you find. And maybe you've felt this too, being surrounded by people yet feeling strangely disconnected, as if the conversation is happening several layers above, where your mind actually lives. Think about the moments when you feel most like yourself. Is it in a noisy room full of shallow chatter? Or in the quiet presence of a book, a walk in nature, or your own thoughts? Schopenhauer argued that the second experience is where the intelligent soul feels more connected not to people, but to something larger, truer, and more enduring. That's the paradox. The deeper the mind, the more it longs for silence, not noise, for sincerity, not performance, for depth, not distraction. He wasn't saying that relationships are meaningless, only that real connection must be based on growth, authenticity, and truth, not convenience or entertainment. That kind of connection is rare, which is why so many thoughtful individuals naturally drift towards solitude until they find it. Let me ask you something. When was the last time someone truly understood your inner world, not your job? Not your smile, but your mind? And how often does that happen? This discomfort you feel in superficial spaces isn't a flaw. It's awareness. It's the quiet signal that your mind is built for something more than constant noise and constant performance. Schopenhauer believed solitude wasn't a rejection of humanity, but a return to it, your own humanity. And if you've ever apologized for needing time alone, or felt guilty for declining invitations, consider this your reassurance. You're not antisocial. You're aligned with a deeper nature that most people never meet within themselves. If solitude is the sanctuary of the wise, then what exactly is the purpose of social life in the world Schopenhauer described? To understand this, we need to look at how he viewed human nature at its core. Schopenhauer wasn't a romantic. He argued that beneath every action, behind every gesture, lies the will to live, a blind, restless drive to survive, to compete, to reproduce, to assert dominance. According to him, this force shapes not only our instincts, but our relationships, conversations, ambitions, and even the societies we build. From this perspective, social life isn't always a realm of harmony and connection. More often, it becomes a subtle battleground where people seek validation, status, alliances, and ego reinforcement. For the average person, this is normal. They socialize to maintain their place in the world, to feel significant, to distract themselves from inner emptiness. But for the thinker, for the person who sees beneath the surface, these dynamics feel suffocating. It's not superiority, it's incompatibility. Imagine standing in a room full of people speaking a language that sounds familiar, yet every word feels empty. You nod, you smile, you participate, but something inside whispers, "This isn't where your mind lives." That's the experience many intelligent individuals have in typical social spaces, not because they lack social skills, but because their values don't align with the unspoken games unfolding around them. And the more self-aware someone becomes, the less tolerance they have for these performances. Clever people learn to blend in, to play the roles expected of them. But the truly wise, they often choose not to play at all. They withdraw not as rebellion, but as protection of their inner clarity. Schopenhauer famously said that the more a person possesses within themselves, the less they need from others. When your internal world is vibrant, rich with ideas, questions, creativity, and meaning, superficial interaction becomes draining rather than energizing. What about you? Have you ever left a social gathering feeling emptier than when you arrived, as if pieces of yourself were scattered across small talk and expectations? If you have, you're not strange. You're sensitive to the noise others mistake for connection. And recognizing this is the first step toward understanding your own nature, not rejecting the world, but navigating it differently. Many intelligent people don't begin their journey with confidence. They begin with confusion. As children, they're often the quiet observers, the ones who feel things deeply, who question what others accept without a second thought. They're not pulled toward trends, noise, or popularity. Instead, they're drawn to imagination, introspection, solitude. And while these qualities are strengths, the world rarely treats them that way. As they grow older, the difference becomes harder to hide. School feels repetitive, conversations feel shallow, and peer groups revolve around things that seem strangely empty. The pressure to conform intensifies. Many gifted minds try desperately to blend in, laughing when they're supposed to, pretending to care about things that bore them, shrinking themselves so they don't stand out. But eventually, something breaks. Not in a dramatic collapse, but in a quiet realization. I don't belong here, not because I'm flawed, but because I'm different. That realization becomes the turning point. The invitations they once accepted out of obligation start to feel heavier. The conversations they once forced themselves to join become exhausting. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they begin stepping back. Not because they're depressed or bitter, but because they stop lying to themselves. This retreat into solitude is not a collapse, it's an awakening. Alone. There is no script to follow, no social role to perform, no mask to hold up. For the first time, the intelligent mind meets itself without distortion. It begins to see its own patterns, fears, curiosities, dreams. And even though this process can be intimidating, it is also liberating. It's the first moment of true self-recognition. When was the first time you realized you didn't need to fit in to feel whole? Most people never reach this point. They spend their lives chasing acceptance, mistaking approval for meaning. But the ones who step back, the ones who dare to face their inner life, discover something deeper. That solitude isn't emptiness, but clarity. Schopenhauer understood this well. He believed that the journey toward wisdom always begins with a crack in the facade, the moment you stop performing and start seeing. And once that awakening happens, the world never looks the same again. There comes a point in every intelligent person's life when the world they once moved through effortlessly begins to feel unfamiliar. Not because anything changed on the outside, but because they changed within. Schopenhauer described this shift as the moment one begins seeing through social illusions, the masks, the roles, the unspoken scripts people follow without ever questioning why. It's like waking up in the middle of a play and realizing everyone else memorized lines you never agreed to read. You nod, you smile, you participate, but something feels off. The conversations seem rehearsed. The motivations feel shallow. The gestures look mechanical. And quietly, you begin to ask yourself, is everyone else truly invested in this? Or are they just avoiding silence? This is when the intelligent mind becomes incompatible with surface-level interactions. As self-knowledge deepens, the tolerance for inauthenticity shrinks. You can pretend for a while, but eventually the weight of the act becomes heavier than the solitude you used to fear. Schopenhauer observed that many people socialize not to connect, but to survive, seeking validation, alliances, status, or distraction. But the thinker steps back and sees the machinery beneath the performance. Not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. And once you see that dynamic, you can't unsee it. Have you ever been in a room full of people and suddenly felt like you were watching life happen from the outside? That strange detachment isn't coldness, it's awakening. For the intelligent soul, solitude eventually becomes preferable, not because others are unworthy, but because the inner world has become too rich, too demanding, too alive to be constantly interrupted. And while society may judge this withdrawal as antisocial, Schopenhauer would call it self-preservation. Something profound happens when someone finally stops fighting their own nature and steps fully into solitude. What begins as withdrawal slowly transforms into revelation. According to Schopenhauer, solitude isn't passive, it's an active unveiling of reality. It strips away distractions, expectations, and noise until all that remains is truth, the truth of who you are, and the truth of the world you live in. Most people avoid this process their entire lives. They look outward for happiness, through approval, praise, attention, or companionship, believing these things will complete them. Schopenhauer called this the folly of dependence, the illusion that fulfillment can be delivered by other people. But the thinker, once alone long enough, begins to understand something crucial. What you're seeking in others can only be cultivated within yourself. This is why solitude feels terrifying to many, but liberating to the few who embrace it. In the quiet, there's no one to impress. There's no mask that matters. Every thought you've buried floats to the surface, and you finally meet the unfiltered version of yourself. It's uncomfortable, even painful, but it's also the beginning of self-mastery. And then comes the next revelation. As the noise fades, patterns appear. You begin noticing how people cling to distractions to avoid self-awareness. How conversations often serve ego, not truth. How society rewards performance over authenticity. Once you see these dynamics clearly, the world stops feeling chaotic and starts feeling transparent. But this clarity comes with a cost. You can't go back to not knowing. You can't return to shallow spaces without feeling the hollowness beneath them. This is why so many intelligent individuals seem distant. They're not disengaged out of superiority, but because their eyes have adjusted to a deeper reality. Here's something to reflect on. What has your solitude already revealed to you about yourself, or about others that you now can't ignore? Schopenhauer believed that people who walk this path aren't isolating themselves. They're awakening. And awakening always begins alone. There comes a moment in solitude when the shift becomes irreversible. What once felt like a temporary retreat begins to reveal something deeper, an unsettling truth that Schopenhauer understood better than almost anyone. Once you see the world without its disguises, you can never unsee it. And that clarity, while liberating, carries a weight that most people never have to bear. When you step away from constant noise, your perception sharpens. You notice how people create illusions just to feel secure. You see how often conversations are tools to escape silence. How relationships are sometimes built not on truth, but on mutual distraction. You observe how many chase validation because they fear facing themselves. And this awareness is both painful and freeing. Schopenhauer argued that intelligent individuals don't withdraw because they dislike humanity. They withdraw because they finally understand it. They see how much of social life revolves around performance, ego protection, and avoidance of introspection. And once you've seen these mechanisms clearly, shallow interactions feel suffocating. Returning to them feels like stepping into a costume you no longer fit. But here's the paradox. The more self-aware you become, the harder it is to relate to those who aren't. Not because you're superior, but because you're speaking different emotional languages. Your mind now operates at a depth where the usual scripts no longer satisfy. You start longing for authenticity, for conversations that don't require translation, for connections that nourish rather than drain. This is why so many deep thinkers seem distant. They're not rejecting others. They're protecting themselves. They're preserving the clarity solitude has given them. Let me ask you something. How many people in your life truly see you, your mind, your depth, your truth, without you having to shrink or simplify yourself? If the answer is very few, Schopenhauer would say that your solitude is not a problem. It's evidence that you're awakening. Solitude, in this sense, isn't escape. It's alignment. It's the moment you stop betraying yourself for belonging. It's the moment you realize authenticity is worth more than approval. There comes a moment in every solitary journey where something shifts quietly but unmistakably. After all the noise has faded, after you've confronted the uncomfortable parts of your inner world, after the illusions have been peeled away layer by layer, you arrive at the truth Schopenhauer considered the greatest of all. The highest form of self-realization can only happen When you stand alone, not surrounded by applause, not carried by relationships, not distracted by routine, but alone, face to face with your own undiluted mind. And this is precisely why most people never reach this stage. Being alone forces you to see everything you've been avoiding, the doubts you bury, the desires you suppress, the truths you fear. It's no surprise that many cling to crowds' noise and constant digital stimulation. They'd rather drown themselves in distraction than hear their real thoughts. But the courageous few, the thinkers, the observers, the awakened, step into that silence instead of running from it. Because solitude isn't absence, it's purification. Schopenhauer believed this was not just a psychological process, but a spiritual one. In solitude, you detach from the will, the restless drive that pulls people towards status, approval, control, and constant desire. For a moment, sometimes brief, sometimes profound, you transcend it. You rise above the endless cycle of wanting, comparing, striving, performing. And that moment changes everything. You stop depending on others for validation. You stop bending yourself to fit expectations. You stop searching for fulfillment in places that can only offer distraction. Instead, you become sovereign, self-contained, whole. This is why, according to Schopenhauer, solitude isn't weakness. It's rebellion, a refusal to be shaped by noise, ego, and society's illusions. In a world terrified of silence, choosing solitude is an act of power. And here's the paradox. Once you've tasted that kind of inner freedom, the world can't pull you back into its games. The applause feels empty. The shallow connections feel heavy. Most conversations feel like performance rather than truth. You don't withdraw because you're antisocial. You withdraw because you finally understand what your soul actually needs. So, again, what have your quietest moments taught you that no one else ever could? Whatever your answer is, that's your awakening speaking. We now have examined why solitude is not merely an act of avoidance, but a conscious, intentional path. We've established how brilliant individuals, much like Schopenhauer, frequently step away from social life, not out of vanity, but in pursuit of something immeasurably profound. But what, precisely, is the ultimate truth? What is the final, defining insight that renders this entire solitary journey not just tolerable, but absolutely essential? It is this: the highest form of genuine self-realization can only be attained in solitude. This transcendence doesn't happen amid applause, nor in conversation, nor even in the emotional warmth of love, but in the raw, unadorned presence of one's own mind, completely stripped of external interference. In this deep quiet, there is no persona to maintain, no one to impress, no mask to wear. There's only the self, and this is where the true work of being begins. This final truth is inherently uncomfortable, which is why most people spend their entire lives actively resisting it. Being truly alone forces you to confront what you've avoided, feel what you've suppressed, and hear the thoughts you've successfully drowned out with noise. Yet, for those who embrace this challenge, and it is indeed an act of tremendous courage, solitude becomes the indispensable gateway to deep insight. Schopenhauer believed that although the world is driven by blind, relentless will, and that suffering is unavoidable, through detachment, art, philosophy, and solitude, we gain the ability to transcend that suffering. We can, momentarily, step outside the cycle. Here's the final, empowering perspective. For Schopenhauer, solitude was more than a sanctuary. It was a profound act of spiritual rebellion. To be alone, to deliberately not require continuous validation, to create solely for the sake of truth, and to think purely for clarity in a world obsessed with conformity and endless distraction, is the ultimate act of defiance. The insightful individual who deliberately embraces solitude is not retreating from life. They are actively elevating it. They choose profound meaning over fleeting comfort, absolute clarity over mass popularity, and inner freedom over easy belonging. Once this choice is made, the world will relentlessly attempt to pull you back with false promises of connection. But you will know the difference because you have tasted the silence that truly nourishes. You have stood in the stillness that makes no demands but simply is. If this journey through solitude resonated with your own experience, don't forget to hit the like button and share this video with one person you know who is quietly walking this path. Let them know they are not alone, but awakening. And subscribe for more truth. You won't want to miss what's coming next.